So great, I really appreciate the speech, and you did go into all the different topics that is really the future for Estonia, and I'm coming from America, so to hear the integration level of these things is just ridiculous. I mean, it's still impossible even though you're saying that it's done.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing. A lot of governments are visiting us and asking that, Estonia is so small. Like, why are you doing stuff decentralized? And we're like saying that, how else would you do it? Because doing everything centralized is a bad idea from the beginning. You're just going to mess yourself up. You have to reinvent your old digital government over and over again otherwise. You want multiples of those ships, and you want to have this flexibility as a result.
I love the ship analogy. I mean, the government will endure, right? And the people will endure. The information will endure, on paper, if must be. But the different parts of the ship can be replaced. Where'd you come up with that analogy?
Reading books. It's a good idea. Many of you do. Books are not overrated. The ship of Theseus is actually the original thing that was covered by J.J. Abrams, and he published a book about this. It was a completely fictional book, but the idea stuck with me. I think that any kind of business, it doesn't matter just the government, it means any kind of your business as well, it should be built like a ship of Theseus. Everybody's telling about, like, sometimes a startup needs to pivot. So this is like no different than having different kind of sails on your ship. You need to make sure that you can pivot, you can make a change, you can fail fast. If the mast doesn't work, replace the mast. Don't replace the whole ship.
It's metaphysical. We have the metaphysical. Is that the ship of Theseus? Where that term comes from? The J.J. Abrams?
No, I think it's a Greek myth.
Plato, right?
Yeah.
Or might be Plato. They're recording this. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, so coming from the U.S., it really is amazing. We can't do this at the national level. We can't do it at the state level. We can't even do it at the city level. And again, it's just blowing me away. So, it's this is I'm being your fan here, not your interviewer. So I wanted to go into a couple different directions because you did cover quite a bit in there. I wanted to talk about open innovation. So you have the data, and the primary customer for your own data is you, or so we think. So we had the data store and the IT services. Could you tell us about APIs and the future of that?
Yeah, one of the things that most people don't know that Estonia was actually ranked really, really low in terms of open data across Europe. Most people don't know why. It's like, how can Estonia, such a highly digital country, be ranked so low? And the reality was that we had an interoperable data exchange platform. We already traded data or exchanged data over X-Road, which is not an open data platform. It's a closed, secure data exchange platform. And Estonia is widely using it, even internally in the government, not just with the private sector. It's like last month alone, there are like over 200 million different data requests that are being handled over X-Road, and only perhaps 2% of them are citizen-related data requests. But we made obviously the change because everybody was looking at Estonia as like, yeah, you do everything well, why don't you do open data well? So we made a change there as well, and ever since we are now in the top 5, which has been a huge stride ever since we realized that this is a problem. Now we have an open data portal, and it's highly popular now. A lot of COVID data was fetched by media. All the charts that you saw was actually a result of a lot of this data being made open. And of course, the most popular one is how much money public sector employees get. It's the most popular source, highly triggered every month.
I love it. I just wanted to share a quick story I was sharing with you earlier. So I'm from Philadelphia, and I had an issue with train schedules. My train was always late every week, every day. It was late 20 minutes. I was late to work 20 minutes every single day. And I thought, oh, they should just move the schedule back 20 minutes. And so I wanted to collect data to support my hypothesis. I collected all the train data, and then I just collected all the train data for all of the trains in the entire city. And I said, well, if I can analyze the one train, I can do it in Excel or write a program. I just wrote a whole new train schedule, and I sent it to the city. I said, here's your new train schedule. And they used it. And they said, okay, well, maybe we should make this data available for people. So now they come up with this word hackathon. And hackathon is one of the ways you were talking about how to engage the public, engage the private sector. And so sometimes you don't even know what you want.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there was this interesting thought experiment, again, 10 or so years ago, including in startup sector, where everybody was challenging the Kevin Costner's famous saying in Field of Dreams that if you build it, they will come. Google was someone that challenged it. They said that, if you build it, it will not actually come. Just because you made an API doesn't mean that the change happens. But I think that in terms of open data, we are seeing that if you do make things open, you might have or enable new kind of business opportunities. And I think this is one of the main sort of roles of a government, to make their data as open and as freely available and accessible to startups and private sector as much as possible, without knowing what kind of solutions might come from there. But it, of course, starts with the discovery. It starts with the fact that people know that these tools are available. So in Estonia, we do have an open data portal that I obviously would say that everybody who's a startup could take a look at and see if they find interesting data sources for their use. But of course, you might also already be aware of it, and perhaps you didn't find something. So there are still a lot of data sources that we want to open up.
Sometimes you can spur the innovation with a party. Like literally, I don't know if you're allowed to serve beer at government, but pizza and beer will go a long way. A little data, pizza and beer in Python, you can solve problems with that. Do you have any types of official engagement?
Yeah, before COVID hit, we were running 3 hackathons, which were public and private sector hackathons, and we want to open them again. But there's an issue that we would like to solve before that's possible. Just running a hackathon and having people coming together was a great event. All the 3 events were really, really great. Media covered them, and they were interesting. But the problem was that none of those solutions ended up live. And this makes me sad. One of those solutions just required 60,000 euros to actually go over the finish line in 4 months. And government didn't have that kind of budget to enable this, which meant that the whole solution was just put into a shelf, and nothing ever happened as a result. I think we need to change this. I think we need to find ways how, if we are going to do hackathons, then the resulting hackathons would mean a short-term contract with the government to actually get this solution to your end user, whether it's a citizen or a government employee. We are exploring this. It is insanely difficult from regulations aspect. You have no idea, because I'm like, but everybody thinks this would be fair. Why it's impossible? There are so many reasons why it's impossible. I can get to those again in the private chats later on, because it would take me too long here. But I definitely think that it's important to create this kind of communities where public sector and private sector and academia can come together to look at this problem, and everybody sees this problem from the different perspective. If government only looks at this problem from one perspective, then it's just going to find a government type of solution for this. This is why most users are never happy with the government solutions, because they look like interfaces for government employees. But, that's not how it should be. It actually should be user-driven. A government is only a different perspective of the same problem.
But that's for hackathons to seed government programs, government solutions. What about hackathons to promote private sector solutions that you don't have to fund whatsoever, or greenlight through legal?
I think, yeah, we can, be philosophical about this. I would love to see a situation where a lot of government employees are more involved with private sector hackathons more directly. In reality, I know how sort of overloaded a lot of government employees are. Even for government hackathons, it has been really difficult because it's not really about how overworked it is or how slow governments can be. Some of it is actually reasonable, and you can understand why, because making changes in laws and policies are not as simple as just changing code. It often takes a long time. My favorite thing has been said that if you want to do innovation, don't involve lawyers first. Do it the other way around, involve lawyers later. All these electric scooters you see around in here and in other countries, they happened because everybody was immediately breaking the law. Because there was no such thing as, what is this little device that is now running around on the streets? So it sort of became a thing, and then lawyers were like, oh, okay, let's build a framework around this, and now it's legal. Had it happened the other way around, it would be half as fast, and it would be twice as expensive. So I think this is like having innovation come first and lawyers second. But as a government employee, it's very difficult to intentionally break the law first. I am being honest here.
Public sector lawyers. So I wanted to bring this back to blockchain a little bit. So one of my theses is that the best use case for blockchain should be government, because everything should be public by default. Everything should be open and transparent and attestable by default. But you had brought up some use cases where we want to think about data that should be public or recallable for national security reasons, or for court orders. So I just wanted to kind of explain this. There are some people in the audience that I've interviewed already, and they think that privacy is over. And you might get that more in this audience, maybe in another audience too, but are birth records public forever? I don't know. So I wanted to just ask you, maybe you could give some color on records that we might think are public but are semi-public.
Yeah, I do agree, having been on the internet forever. I do agree if something becomes public in the internet, it's very hard to kill it off. It's a Barbra Streisand effect all over. I think that this is definitely true. But at the same time, I don't think that we should just, because such things happen, that we should immediately assume that everything is always public and should always be public. I think that privacy is a very sensitive topic that we can never assume for another person, including our own children. We can never assume their idea of privacy once they actually grow up. So whether we post certain pictures about them online, like, would they be fine with it? It's not for us to decide, it's actually for them to decide, and we have to understand their idea of privacy. So I think that it is an important role for governments as a whole to protect your privacy as much as possible, even if leaking it is far easier today than it was, let's say, 20 years ago.
And that's important. So this is the data subject. So this is where we're talking about the data store, where the subject of the data is people, the citizens, and their business records. Maybe their taxes, maybe whatever this is. And taxes should be attested, but not public, obviously, but maybe provable. But if you prove it, then it's public. Who knows? So what if the records are government? What if government is the subject of these records?
Yeah, I think that we can draw the line in different ways. One of the things where we've been thinking about is that how much control over data we can actually give the citizens. In Estonia's case, for example, we do show you if someone in the government or from private sector actually requests your population data. We make it visible to you, so you can actually see. So if you go home today, and I'm not advocating this, but if you drive over the speed limits and the police finds you, you're going to actually see this data in your citizen portal. You can see that the police requested your data. And you can sort of sense why it happened, because you were pulled over. I think that these kind of things we try to make as visible as possible. But at the same time, government still has a duty for people for making their mistakes that they might not be aware of. For example, while we can technically build you a solution where your diplomas are in your crypto wallet, and government does not store it and only accesses it if you give a consent, then what happens if you suddenly damage your phone in a way that you have no recovery options? Are you suddenly out of your academic degree? It should never happen. A government has a duty to protect you against mistakes like this. Oh, hi, a future taxpayer.
Broadly, so what are more opportunities that you see for public-private participation? So we have specific things related to data, and data versus the IT. We talked about hackathons. We've talked about your broader schemes. Outside of your department, maybe. Are there other departments? How does this work in this country? You've got a foreign audience, too.
Yeah, and do learn the lessons from Estonia. From that sense. I think that Estonia is, in its current state, we are also now about to become a country that has as much difficulty in implementing innovation as the old Europe, so to speak. When we look at the problems that Germany's digital government faces, obviously a lot of Germany's digital government still uses fax machines. For Estonia, this is weird. But I think that in many ways, Estonian digital government today also has a lot of legacy. And this is why one of the challenges that I also wanted to raise up is how can we actually make it so that it is more like a boat that we can make changes to while it's running, so that we can implement new kind of tools. Perhaps if Alphabill becomes immensely successful, how we can use these tokens in the digital government economy as well, how we can actually make it happen. I think that in many ways, everything you build becomes legacy. You have to understand this. So how can you make sure that the bill of legacy doesn't become too high in the long term? It is the duty of every leader here that is trying to come up with best solutions for their organization or for their government, because you have to understand that it's not your time in that role, it's actually your time after this role is over, when the legacy happens. So any kind of decision that you do has to survive beyond your role in whatever job you actually have. If we can do this, if we can inspire solutions like this, if we can make sure that the digital government is built in a way that it is flexible and it is interoperable and it is lasting few years longer than it otherwise would, I think it would make a huge impact, regardless if it's Estonia, regardless if it's Germany, regardless if it's one of the states in the United States.
Maybe you could share, I wanted to understand maybe the different departments. I understand you're the CTO, so you have broad purview, which this doesn't even make sense to me how this works, but is there anything beyond your purview or on a different vertical?
In Estonia's case, what is happening is that in 1991 we realized that we want a decentralized digital government. The main reason for this was that we realized that the IT engineers that are working with police should be close to the police. This is again why if a startup community wants to get involved with building the next generation digital government in Estonia, you should be more close to the government. You should make yourself aware of the digital agenda and the strategy and the researches that we have actually published. I think it's critical because only then you can actually say that, hey, we cannot cooperate. Even though we know what you're doing, we cannot cooperate. I think this is critical. So what we are doing in Estonia, how we're doing it, once we decentralized everything, we still have a central leadership and central platforms for things that adhere across the government. So X-Road, as such, is the responsibility of my ministry and our units, State Information Authority, which is an IT development house that is responsible for X-Road's implementation in Estonia. We are also responsible for electronic identity. But tools that are related to police, for example, or health workers, they are developed separately in their own decentralized domains. So they adhere to the same principles, the same frameworks, the same interoperability frameworks across the government, and some central cross-functional requirements as well. But they still have a freedom to do these things based on how they see their own domain. So as long as they keep things in law, and in terms of law, X-Road and electronic identity are both in Estonia's law. They are not recommended things to use. They are in our law, and this is why they have been so successful compared to other states that have used X-Road. Because they are in law, these solutions are also always going to use X-Road. But they have the freedom to do these things the way that a doctor perhaps would need, or a policeman would actually need, without me, for example, saying that, no, you cannot do it like this. If their what is like, if their business what they actually want to solve is like 100% for them to decide. We are coordinating the how, the core principles, the vision, the longer-term strategic vision of technology.
Last topic, and then maybe we can get some questions from the audience too. I just wanted to go back a little bit into the life services, the events, the life events. So if everything's so decentralized, and the data is coming from you're the custodian of the data. So we've got the data, you're the custodian. It's kind of like a webhook, right? So we've got the data, we've got the API, now we've got the webhooks, okay? So the data's here, and then there's gonna be a trigger. It could be a birth triggers a payment. A birth triggers a 6-month checkup to make sure the baby's well, or specific child services, or the mother, and there's different things. So in terms of your role with the coordination and the leadership role and the service to the service providers, since you're decentralized, how do you manage the choice of the webhooks and then the delivery to these decentralized parties? Are you going to negotiate with police officers or with Parliament?
It's a great question. And I think that how we're doing it is we realize that we have, because digital government has been built from the government perspective. This is why we have 20 of those services related to the birth of a child, which is insane if you have to know all those 20. We realize that we have to do it from the user perspective and give temporarily the large life event role, for example, childbirth, into a singular unit that is responsible for coordinating how this life event is going to happen across its life cycle until the service is over. So what we are doing is that with State Information Authority, our central IT development team that is responsible for government web portal, we have a separate unit there that is responsible for proactive life event services. So their role is to orchestrate the process. We are using at the moment trialing things like Camunda and Flowable as BPM orchestration tools so that the large-scale business process is orchestrated. But this large-scale business process is what triggers these APIs of different units across the government in different domains. and waiting for certain answers for them, or just notifying them and then proceeding until the role is over. And later on, we can give this business process to its most sort of, how to say, its closest domain. In terms of child's birth, it's Interior Ministry, which means that likely it's moving into IT development team that is dealing with Interior Ministry the most. And it's not going to be central unit anymore. But the central tools and platforms, how you can actually orchestrate all this, are still going to be standardized.
So the data is standard, the access is standard. What about, okay, so child's born, that's a health record, which actually affects your census. This is a dumb question coming from an American, but do you need authorization to bring the data from the health department to the census department?
Yes.
And then does this go back to Parliament each time, or you just like, hey?
This is one of the biggest headaches. Like, government needs to have a legal permission from government to access its own health data between different domains. Again, this is done for privacy reasons. Like, a lot of citizens sometimes come to us and say that, hey, I had to fill this form, and my address was blank, but I know that I have updated my address in population registry. And technically, we have this principle that we inspired in Europe called once-only principle, that if you ask for your address once, then the government can actually use it in multiple different contexts. But legally, it doesn't really work as well. Because in reality, you as a citizen might be okay to give this data to police, or might be able to give this data to your doctor, but maybe you don't want to give this into a statistician that is working in the government. Maybe you don't want it to give it into another service. The privacy is still sort of yours, and this is why it's a huge struggle. Europe does want to implement the once-only principle, but even Europe knows how difficult it is, because an address, even though you filled it in a single sort of form, is the same is different based on the contexts. In Estonia, a lot of people here, I'm sure we have some Estonians here as well, don't actually have the correct address in their population registry. Do you know why? Do you know why?
Because Google didn't have it in their address when you auto-completed it.
They want their taxes to go elsewhere.
Okay.
And
that's the tax address.
Yeah, and this is the tax address. The government's address is your tax address. Yeah. And today, people they would then be surprised at why these communications are going to a different address. This is something that a lot of people are doing. And so at some point, you're like, hey, government is asking me to ask this address again. But from the other perspective, you actually want them to ask it again. So
they're tricking you. They want to get your real address. They don't want your tax address.
Yeah, well, we cannot actually use your mobile phone data to clearly understand where you actually work and live and sleep.
Yeah. Okay, so again, this is related to the data subject. So we're talking about taking data we obviously respect the privacy of the citizens first, I guess. National security first, then citizens, then everything else, right? So aside from national security and citizens, what about government, internal government? Do you ever see issues where maybe the police has records not related to the citizens, but related to their internal functioning? And maybe there's a watchdog that would like the records, but the police would rather say, well, come audit me, rather than watch me all the time.
Yeah, we have those situations. I think that in reality, those situations are being solved between the two units separately. Like the data that is not private is not immediately public. It's not public by default for, again, security reasons. Someone has to be responsible for it. I'm of a belief that you cannot just, including with open source, you cannot just make things open. It's just like, now the code is up there, now I can tick the box. If you are responsible for open source, you're actually responsible for mastering the code while it's in the open as well. For the support, for the security issues that it might result. I think these things are absolutely critical, including with data. So just having data open, it means that you actually have more budget for this, because it's being open. Someone is responsible for it, someone is maintaining it, someone is making sure that the use of this doesn't call denial of service attacks and so on and so forth. I think it's very, very important. And this is what government internally does. It's like if someone wants access to another government unit's data source, it's difficult if it's between different domains. But it's possible if they agree.
We have a couple of these things. So in the state of Florida, all emails are public by default. So if you ever email anybody in government, it says, reminder, this is going to be published. And at the end of the month, there's a whole email dump. Like the email dumps you hear about on the internet, they do that from Sony, from this and that. They just do it by default. And it obviously has an impact on the way that they provide government services. Another one related to open source, you have to publish, but for national security reasons, for a lot of things, you really have to be careful about how you publish it, to be careful, that you're not hurting yourself, but also you want to be the most helpful. So this is budget. You need to have people that are there to answer questions, that are there to, it's the same thing like the hackathon.
Yeah, I think that the design principles there are the key. I think that everything should be designed open by default, and then you restrict if you realize that this is sensitive data or this is private data, instead of everything being developed closed by default and then opened gradually. I am of a belief that open by default is something that is absolutely critical for governments. But in order to actually get there, it's a lot of work. We can have those, including with open source, we today have this principle that code that government procures includes government IP, because government has given its input, which means it has right for the IP, and then thus it also has a right to open source it, and then also share it in the public. So today, by default, we do things open, including we validate that new data sources are being implemented into open data portal from the beginning. But a lot of legacy sources are still not, because again, budgeting is difficult for government.
Yeah, the US military is actually pretty big on open sourcing, and they have a pretty nice strategy. It's coming out of the, I guess Army Research Lab is one of them that has published pretty well on this. And they have a lot of guidelines. They assume that, obviously, in the past, they've been closed. And maybe in the future, they'll do some things. But the real question is, how do you move? How do you move from private to open? And there's a lot of checkboxes, just like every other government service and every review. You have a lot of checkboxes. And if we just do the things, hopefully we can help a lot of people. And obviously, the whole point of this is it should be default. But then we welcome input. These are the new hires that you're going to make.
Yeah.
Imagine the future when you hire people and they already know how to use Xroad because they've deployed it locally on Docker for no reason, because that's what you do. You're like, oh, I'm going to learn Xroad today.
Not so surprised today, at least from Estonian private sector, because most of the Xroad users are actually from the private sector. This is like one of the things that Estonia uses Xroad. Everybody thinks that it's government that uses Xroad. Majority of Xroad users are actually private sector companies.
And that reduces the cost of hiring, of training. So make sure you fight for that when you want budget to release it, that's where you're going to save. All right, let's open it up to the audience. We've got a great guest here on stage, so don't let him leave. Angel, what's up?
Yes. So what are you guys doing? You may have talked about this earlier before. How do you see blockchain potentially impacting your elections? And how can you verify that the votes are real and everything else?
There's this. I was pretty sure that the election question is coming up. It was the first one. I think that the thing with elections and elections in liberal democracies, the main thing is that you need to trust something in the process, because your vote can never actually be validated again in the future that you voted for this person. There's a very clear reason why it's not possible. It's because you want to assure that the future governments are never going to discriminate you against the votes that you had in the past. This is absolutely critical. So just like in a physical box you drop your vote, nobody can ever connect you to that vote later on down the road. And of course, this is why elections in Estonia and internet-based elections in Estonia are highly sort of a media mess whenever elections happen, because there are parties that are saying that, hey, we do not trust this because we cannot assure that you actually voted for this person. There's a second reason as well why these kind of elections that we have actually work in Estonia. This is not because of blockchain. Usually some people have been saying that, it's because of blockchain, this is why Estonian internet-based voting works. No, Estonian internet-based voting works because you can vote again. Only your last vote counts. And this is how we can actually make sure that while someone is giving you a vodka bottle here to say that, hey, please vote for this from your computer, and you're going to vote for this on your computer. And then you go home having drank the vodka bottle, and then you still vote for whom you actually wanted to vote for. So this is how you actually do internet-based voting. You get rid of the whole idea of, but what if someone was manipulated? It's like, no, they can still go home and vote for whom they want. And if that's not a problem, if that is a problem, then they can still physically go to the voting booth, because internet-based voting ends before the physical voting does. So you can overwrite your internet vote with your physical one. So I think that blockchain might definitely play a larger role there as well, but because you can never connect your vote to whom you actually voted for. You can never have a technical mechanism for it. I don't think the blockchain itself is the right tool for it. You can do logs with blockchain. In Estonia, most of the stuff where we're using blockchain is actually logs for data access and data sort of fingerprints. And we validate that data hasn't been changed because of the 2007 cyber attacks, where we didn't know. We did not know which databases had been changed and so on and so forth. Because of KSI blockchain, which is developed by Guardtime, we have this opportunity now. So we know if data has been tampered with. And this is, I think, the most valuable part of it. But if someone has tampered your vote with, you just have to trust the system in many ways. Just because being able to not trust the system means that you don't actually believe in the process. And then, again, your vote could be discriminated against you, which is something that you do not want in a democratic environment.
Next question.
Yeah. I think that governments should never be cutting-edge innovators, but they should be, in Estonia's case, pre-mainstream. I think that the startups and the private sector are going to show the way. Same thing with AI at the moment. It's like we do not just immediately rush into using all of this. We will see how many startups and private sectors are actually rushing into this. A lot of those ideas are going to burn. As there have been people saying on this stage, most of the projects are going to fail that are in NFT space or blockchain space. Most already have failed. Very few have actually managed to survive. I think that the government cannot be so cutting edge that it risks or bets into something that might fail. So just like with ID card, which Estonia did make a mistake of, we made this chip-based ID card, the PKI system, everything absolutely brilliant. Nobody used them. In the media, there were jokes being made about, oh, I can scrape the frozen windows with this. It only happened once private sector started using it. Today, we have Smart ID, which is an alternative way of using your ID card to authenticate yourself into online services. We have implemented, this is a private sector solution, we have implemented in the government authentication gateways as well, because private sector showed that users want something that is more convenient and easy for them. Private sector showed the way. So we are definitely paying attention to a lot of stuff that our startup community is doing, as well as not just in Estonia, but also internationally, as much as possible, so that to see what actually becomes fundamental enough that it could be explored. And then we want to run these smaller sort of projects to try this out. But it's not going to happen the other way around. I think that perhaps the KSI blockchain was a rare exception for this, because we had a crisis just happened in 2007, and we needed an immediate solution to give us something. And private sector and academia were ready to sort of give us an idea how we can actually do it.
Please.
Yeah, in many ways, Estonia is obviously also a representative democracy, which means that we have to trust that the people that we have elected are going to make the best call for us, and we're going to judge them if they clearly don't. I don't think that this is something that is just happening in UK. It's one of those symptoms of having a democracy that works in the way it does. I'm not sure if and how it would be, been done a little bit differently. In Estonia, we do have these things where you can vote for how government certain funding is going to be used on some community project. Like if some school is going to be fixed up, or some street is going to be fixed up, or some park is going to be fixed up. There are these kind of votings where people are gathered. Like that are being voted on by like different citizens of Estonia, and their vote is going to be taken into account in what project is going to be funded. But these are exceptions rather than a rule today. We don't have sort of government funding that is entirely decided in large parts by citizen votes, which could be an interesting space to explore, but we are not really there yet. But we've had these fireside chats about these ideas, like what could be if we can actually have certain set of funding or certain set of benefits, such as money from e-residency, for example, to be entirely deployed for citizen vote to be used to benefit certain sections or sectors in government.
All right, I think we have a last question as well.
Yeah, has anyone here heard about the thing called Single Digital Gateway? Do we have hands? This is a great example where Estonia inspired a concept in European Union, and essentially we are shooting ourselves in the foot as a result. Single Digital Gateway is a concept where you can get your service across the European Union as a citizen, a digital service that you can, for example, setting up a company in another country or proving your education in another country. Like there's this concept where if you are, for example, Estonian, you go to Spain and you can just, start up a company there digitally, online, by giving access to data that is in Estonian ecosystem, and vice versa. If someone from Spain comes to Estonia, they can use Estonian digital ecosystem and services. It's a huge concept that Estonia inspired, but it's so difficult to actually pull off. There are going to be fines. We already know. We have not budgeted the fines, but we know that Estonia itself is going to be fined by the end of this year because we don't have these services ready the way actually the regulation is defining those services. I think that European interoperability is a huge issue. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of my time to attend those meetings and realize that I've spent my whole day in a way where only 10% perhaps was actual value for me. Simply because a lot of those workshops where all the member states are discussing these things, these are like the Star Wars Galactic Council. It's like a lot of ideas by everybody. Everybody has a right to say a word and have an opinion. And it's such a slow process to make this kind of change. Definitely not good for innovation. I think that they perhaps start discussing NFTs in a more real way, maybe in 2040, if these things are continuing as slow as they are. I think that legislation being slow technically is not a huge problem, though, because if you manage to disrupt, I think the disruption rate was, Malcolm Gladwell, I think, said it's 20%, the tipping point. If you manage to create a solution that 20% of users start using, then the legislation will pay attention, and then everybody starts using it much more quickly. So the challenge for NFTs, the challenge for blockchain solutions, the challenge for crypto coins and tokens is to reach the 20%. And once this happens, you will have legislation come up very, very fast. Until you are below the 20%, it's going to be a struggle, and you will have very hard time finding some political support or legislation support for it.
Bonus round, double overtime. Final, second question.
Hey, so I guess for like companies that are located in other places that, like America, for me, that don't have as clear regulation, like what advice do you have for us? And do you think it's a good idea to potentially consider like moving business to Estonia? Just kind of interested in that, like what benefits there might be.
I think that not just Estonia, I think European space in general is like once you establish yourself in Europe, then you sort of get this weird quality criteria. Everybody thinks that, oh, because you are in Europe, we know that you have huge amount of legislation already and bureaucracy you have to do and certification you have to do, that you must be trustworthy. I think that this is, in a way, benefit. It's expensive benefit because you have to go through all of those things, all these user agreements and all these things that you have to take into account to do it. But if you go through it, I do think, I don't have actual data to support this, but I do think that you will be seen as more trustworthy if you're established in Europe and you're running your business in Europe.
All right, yeah, and I guess just as a follow-up, like, do you think there's any like specific benefits to like Estonia, like, you know, maybe to create your business in or for startups?
Well, I definitely do think so, because Estonian startup community is very, very thriving. But again, at the same time, I'm a tech liberal in a way. I think that if you have, if you create your company in a place where you have a lot of inspiring people around you, then this is likely more valuable than just, you know, considering that we did it in Estonia. I think that if you do it in Estonia, involve the startup community. There are a lot of unicorns here, a lot of people that are full of bright ideas. A lot of people are sitting in this room here with you today. I think that this is far more valuable. So find the ability, like this environment, which will help your company thrive the most. And this is going to be helped by the community around this, not just the legislative sort of business space. We do not have special sort of, how to say, regulations or special sort of programs just to encourage startups. We have, just like every other sort of startup-oriented or tech-oriented government, we have these programs from government side that are supporting startups, but these are everywhere. So it's really about the fact how you can find the environment that enables your company or your idea thrive the most. And I think that Estonia, in many ways, has a lot of those startups to help you do this.
Thank you. I just want to say it's awesome that you have a government CTO. That's like incredibly cool. So,
thank you.
The fan club is growing, you see?
Yeah, very good.
All right, I think we're being escorted off stage. We're being escorted out.
What?
The MC.
We can just leave, you know.
Yeah, we just walk out that way.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.